Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Fredrickson Health Show. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Fredrickson. On today's show, we have Todd VanDe Hei, the CEO and founder of Stark Health. Why should you care about this episode, and why was I interested in this episode to begin with? I think healthcare should be collaborative. I don't think it should be confusing. So many times you have people that they go to their medical doctor, then they go to another doctor, or maybe they go to their other chiropractor, or they go to their nutritionist, and they're hearing different conflicting things. And so then it gets confusing on when to do what. Am I doing the right thing? Am I not doing the right thing? And so it gets confusing, and maybe you don't get the outcomes you wanted because you kind of didn't really do any of the things that you were told to begin with. Well, what Todd has done, he's kind of brought everyone under one roof, from a strength coach, nutritionist, medical doctor, naturopath, chiropractor. They really have a collaborative approach to achieve the best possible outcome for each individual patient. And so Todd, he's living, breathing proof that this works. Take a look at his physique, take a look at what he does for his diet, his mindset, and look at his performance. I mean, he is aging well, and he's living proof of this. But Todd's journey didn't just start in health. It started in business. And as a former president of a publicly traded manufacturing company, he managed multi-million-dollar product launches, which included teams of experts from sales, engineering, and finance to ensure that every decision was backed by diverse perspectives. This same collaborative mindset that he saw in business, he started to think about, well, maybe we can do this in healthcare. Maybe we can have different perspectives, and we can all get along to achieve the best possible result. This kind of happened out of happenstance, is that he had a medical doctor tell him one thing and a strength coach that had a differing perspective. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to get the two minds to talk and collaborate, which led him to be frustrated. So out of this frustration, he built his own team from medical doctors, naturopaths, chiropractors, nutritionists, and strength coaches. And they're all working together to achieve optimal patient health. And at Stark, they don't just treat symptoms, they collaborate, they strategize. So their health team brings in specialists together with the patient, ensuring that every decision is backed by collective expertise, which I think is fantastic. And for Todd, health just isn't clinical; it's personal. He's got a personal story. He's got his own personal health issues, like many of us do. But at Stark, they're really striving to get high performing individuals who demand more from their bodies and minds. Today, we're going to dive into what makes this approach so powerful, how Todd's own journey shaped it, and why the future of healthcare has to be collaborative. So this is an episode you don't want to miss. Tune in for more. Please like and subscribe to this episode if you found it helpful. Share it with a friend so we get more people to view content like this. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode with Todd, and we'll see you on the next one.
Welcome to the Fredrickson Health Show, highlighting expert practitioners from health, fitness, injury prevention, functional medicine, and integrative medicine. If you are into upgrading and optimizing your health, this podcast is for you. This podcast is for educational purposes only and not intended to be used as personalized medical advice. And now, here is your host, Dr. Robert Fredrickson.
Todd, thank you for coming on today.
Great to be here.
So Todd, for everyone listening, tell us a little bit about you, how you got started into the health and nutrition space, and kind of how Stark got envisioned and created.
Okay. Well, we'll start with the first part.
Okay.
The way I got into it was it was happenstance, a mistake, actually sprung out of a disaster. I was previously in manufacturing, which is, I guess it's kind of relevant because it's had a big effect on, or a big impact on how Stark is designed today. But I had a conflict with the board of directors. It was a publicly traded company, and I was fired. Then I retired, and expanded my real estate portfolio in California. And then the '08 real estate crisis hit. By 2010, I'd lost everything except for about $60,000, and didn't have a job, a family. My wife went back to work. It was just an absolute living nightmare. I literally would get down on my knees and pray for God to take my life on a daily basis. I know it sounds really bleak. I can talk about it today because it was, 16, 17 years ago, but it was a very dark time in my life. I felt like my identity was torn from me, and I had to kind of become something different because I was successful and I'd failed. And failure had not been a part of my life up until that moment. Now it's a big part of my life. So I was standing in my jacuzzi in the throes of a midlife crisis, and I had long hair and everything to represent that. And the wind from the ocean was blowing through my hair, and my BlackBerry rang. Gives you an idea what the timing was. It was about 2000, at the end of 2010. It was right when I think the first iPhone was coming out, and it sort of vibrated on the edge of the jacuzzi, and I grabbed it, and it was a strength coach by the name of Brad Davidson, and he was about to shut his business down. There were a lot of businesses shutting down at that point in time, especially in Southern California. And he had a small gym, and told me that he heard from a friend who was actually a chiropractor, that I was looking for a job. And I jokingly told him I would clear my schedule because I didn't have anything going on, and met with him the next day. And within a couple of days, we had a partnership agreement drafted. And it sounds very official, but bear in mind, I was not sound, emotionally, mentally. I was in a very strange. I was actually on Prozac as well for
Oh wow.
the
Okay.
first and only time in my
Yeah.
life. It was just a total disaster. And so in that state, I told Brad that we should form a partnership and turn his business around and make this thing spectacular. Um, Looking back, there was no good reason for me to have partnered with him because there really was no business. It was just a small list of clients and a subcontractor that was the receptionist part-time, who I asked for the books. She was also the bookkeeper, and she gave me the company checkbook, those old big company checkbooks. And I'm like, well, where are the books? And she said, this is it. It's just a checkbook. So, everything had to be created. That's how Stark started. It wasn't some mastermind, beautifully laid out plan. It just happened or sprung out of disaster. And so Brad and I, we were like opposite ends of a magnet. We both really needed each other. I needed to be needed, and he really needed a business person. So we developed the business in a very different way back then. It was mostly exercise and nutrition and some supplements that were being sold that were highly influenced by the famous strength coach Charles Poliquin. Brad
Mm,
attended to a bunch
yeah.
of his seminars, and he was really a functional medicine practitioner. I don't know even know
Oh
if the
yeah.
term was around back then, but uh, a lot of the ideas that sort of made their way into the Stark ecosystem originated with him in a very messy way. Like, I don't think that his methods of testing and those sorts of uh, procedures that he had in place really were were good, and good for the patients, or the what we call our clients is our students. But it was a place to start, and it was a place for me to begin learning. So a couple of years, well, about a year down the road, after starting Stark in January of 2011, I I was feeling, I don't know, I guess I would describe, in contrast to my previous unhealthy version of myself, I was feeling sort of like a superhero, honestly. Like, I didn't have a belly anymore, and my aches and pains were kind of gone. And the chronic issues that I faced for so many years, like regular migraines and almost daily headaches. Like, I had headaches 5 or 6 days a week that I used to take ibuprofen for prophylactically to try to prevent it or minimize it. And just in a sort of a constant state of brain fog, attempting to keep my eyes open throughout the entire course of the day, and using coffee to kind of prop myself up. That was all sort of in the background, and I was shocked and amazed that it was. And most of it came from intelligent strength training to a certain degree, but most of it was just eliminating certain foods from my diet, like gluten and dairy and eggs, and which are back in, by the way. Eggs, or pardon me, gluten probably had the biggest impact, because the systemic inflammation that was causing my body was gone, and there went the headaches, and there went the neck pain, and my pinkies used to hurt. Like, if I eat gluten today, my both pinkies, the first knuckle on both pinkies will start to ache within about 15 or 20 minutes.
I actually noticed that too the same day or next day. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty fast. I don't. I don't eat it anymore, so I don't feel that feeling very often. But every once in a while, something sneaks its way into my diet, and I'm like, oh, I think there was gluten in there. But if you imagine me eating like that every day, every meal for my entire life, and the inflammation that that was causing, and the uh, the the problems that the inflammation was causing down the road, like the constant state of pain and interrupted sleep and headaches. It was really a what I looking back now, I see myself as someone that lived in a miserable physical state constantly, but I was used to it because it was my entire life. And so back to 2012, that's gone. And I'm just really fit and healthy. But I didn't know if I was really healthy, and I started getting concerned about it because in 2012, headlines started popping up all over the news about how red meat and um, well, red meat in general causes cancer and heart disease. That was the headline, if I'm recalling correctly. And and I didn't really think much of it because I was just like, oh man, look at me, I'm doing really well. But then we started having students come to me like, hey Todd, knock on the door. I just went to see my general practitioner. He says or she says I look great, medically speaking. My labs look fantastic. But I told him how I'm eating, and he freaked out and said I need to stop eating so much red meat and protein in general, actually. And after several of those conversations and me trying to argue the opposite, which was, awkward for me because I'm not a medical practitioner and I'm just the one experiencing these things alongside them. I thought, well, maybe there's some truth to this. Maybe I need to go, get my labs done and see my doctor. And so I did. And he gave me the same story. He said, everything looks great. You look fantastic. I'm like, yeah, I feel great. And he said, but you need to stop eating so much red meat. He looked at my lipids, of course, and my total cholesterol was 207. My LDLs were 120. My HDLs were 85-ish. And my triglycerides were in the 40s.
Sounds pretty good to me. Yeah.
I was a freaking specimen, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I didn't know that at that point in time because I really didn't understand. But I came back and I brought them to Brad, and Brad's like, "You're a specimen." And now I'm confused. I'm like, "Well, do I listen to strength coach Brad, who's not a doctor, or do I listen to my actual doctor, who's in fact a doctor?" But I'm starting to question things a little bit at this stage. And so I reached out to my doctor. I couldn't actually speak with him. I connected to the office, and I said, "Hey, I'd like to schedule a visit with him, or just a phone call with Brad and him and myself, and let's talk about this red meat thing and how I'm actually doing, because my friend over here is telling me that I'm fine, and Dr. So and so tells me that I'm on the brink of total disaster. So I just want to understand." And my doctor was talking about putting me on statins as well at that stage. Standards of care.
Right.
So she said he can't do that, that there's no way to schedule an appointment like that. It doesn't fall within the structure of their business, essentially. It's not billable to insurance. I said I'm happy to just pay in cash for his time. And she just never got back to me. And so I can tell getting off the phone, I know what rejection is. I can get off the phone and I'm like, hey, she's just trying to politely say no. So now I'm angry. Like, why can't I do this? Why can't I have that appointment? It seems like the most basic thing in the world. And I flash back to manufacturing, remembering that when we would roll out a $500,000 product or a $2 million product, depending on what the product was, that there was sort of like the range of investment. I would have a team assembled that would debate the efficacy of that product. And there would be a manufacturing person and meaning like an engineer, and there'd be the CFO, who's obviously a financial person, the marketing head, who is a artistic, creative individual, myself, the head of sales, and we would debate this thing. And things would pop up like, well, that's not manufacturable over and over again. You can just make a sample, but we can't manufacture it. So it's going to spring into a bunch of customer service problems. And the CFO would be like, your costing's wrong, the margins are terrible, whatever. It would be this debate. And we would arrive at a conclusion that was either scrap it or move forward or make adaptations. And that was for a consumer durable product. Like I knew everything about that product, everything you could possibly imagine about that specific product, from the raw materials through the finishing of the product. And the human body is not that at all. Like we don't know everything about it. We're still learning about it. And I'm in a constant state of overwhelm in the things that I don't understand, because there's so much for me to learn. And the medical practitioners, they have to feel that same thing. They have to believe it. I mean, the half-life of medical research today is like 12 months or 18 months. So half of what we believe to be true today, maybe in a year we're going to think that it's not, or believe that it's not. And 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 so there's not a sense of humility in that exercise of determining what a patient should do moving forward to optimize their health, or just to not be sick. So that struck me in a flash. I'm like, this is like a crime. How can I not have this information to take care of my health? I'm confused and I'm anxious now after thinking that I'm on the right track, that maybe I'm not. And there was no solution back then. And that's when I decided, well, we're going to create that. Like I'm going to assemble that team, just like we did in manufacturing. And they're going to be different practitioners with different licenses, and some unlicensed people too, because there's a lot of value that people like strength coaches bring to the table that are not licensed. And in California anyway, not nutritionists aren't licensed, that provide valuable insight and perspective that maybe the doctors don't. That was the beginning of what Stark is. That's how or it's not some, master planned concept. It was just in a flash, because of a need that I had, and I believed that everybody also should have. They don't even understand that they should want that, because it just didn't exist. So that was the beginning, and it's really been kind of a bizarre. It's been like 13 years of battles, finishing up with sort of a bizarre state of affairs in the change in the administration, and hearing RFK Jr. I went to see him speak once in November. Hearing him speak about what he wants to accomplish and the changes that he thinks need to be pushed forward, it was so strange for me to hear my words coming out of his mouth, and having him be in that position potentially at that point. And perhaps this battle that has been what I've experienced for the last 13 or 14 years, which is throw the gloves off, go after the endocrinologist, the oncologist, the family practice doctor that are not keeping up to date with recent research, and are essentially telling the patient who's sort of caught in the middle in that tug of war that we're not qualified, that we aren't understanding, that we don't have their same credentials and shouldn't fight the battle, even though we have doctors on staff now. So it's a different level of tug of war. I've got people on our end at Stark who can pull just as hard. Maybe we just don't have the relationship for as long with the patient as they do. So it's a little bit more even, but we're about to really win all the tugs now, because consumers, I think, are becoming more aware of what things like functional medicine are, and particularly in your generation and younger, they question systems, and definitely medical practitioners. And medical practitioners are also asking the same question, like, why are we here? Like, why is it such a shit show in the United States among patients just wanting to not be sick? Forget about being healthy, but just to get out of a state of sickness. Why is it such a battle? So that's the history of Stark, and why it exists. I wish I had a better story, something a
No,
little
I
bit
love
more.
that. Yeah, no. So for a frame of reference, tell me how many employees you guys have now, and how many different nutritionists, doctors, strength coaches do you guys have on staff? Because patients now are confused, and so they go to one doctor, they go to another doctor. They have no one to really kind of bounce ideas back and forth. And you guys, just from what I've seen online, it's a spectacular practice, and that you guys have so many different minds collaborating together
Mhm.
in order to provide the best care possible from all different aspects.
It is a spectacular practice. We do spectacular things. We have a total team of 70. Half of them are exercise specialists, because this is an interesting perspective. I think your listeners will find this helpful. Strength training is not natural. We designed that. Like, you wouldn't go into woods or the mountains and find a 1 inch perfectly shaped cylinder that is a barbell or a dumbbell, or if it's a barbell that's perfectly balanced all the way across and you have exactly the same weights all the way across, and that you move through an exercise like a deadlift multiple times in a row. I mean, we weren't exactly designed to do that. We know that it elicits changes in the body when you do that. The the question is, what are the changes, and are they the ones that you really want? And by that, I mean, if you go into a 24-hour fitness and you see a bunch of 25-year-old dudes doing curls, do they really want stronger biceps? And do they understand that they are, by doing a curl in that fashion, that they are creating shoulder problems or, whatever else? Their chin is craned out and it's just a total mess, right? And they're doing it over and over and over again, and they've done the same workout for 5 years. They are If they're effective, they're adapting to it and they're causing orthopedic issues that I'm sure you've seen over and over again.
Yeah,
So,
and I was one of those guys too when I was a kid. We've all kind of
mhm,
evolved from
I
there.
was too.
Yeah, so
Yeah, I was too. It's a powerful tool, but it is not natural. And so at Stark, because it's not optimal to do a class or just write a program for someone, and we only do what we think is the very best, regardless of cost. It's a very simple strategy or place that we've dropped ourselves into the market. Only the best, no matter what it costs. If you have that frame of mind, you would never not train with a very well educated strength coach who understands to a certain degree orthopedic health. And in the Stark ecosystem, they're elbow to elbow with chiropractors. And so they have lots of questions about range of motion and mobility that can be adequately answered. And the chiropractors can influence the way a training program is designed. And even to take a little bit further, the strength coaches don't even write the programs at Stark. Another team above them designs the programs because, in my opinion, within the realm of exercise, designing a strength training program is the most sophisticated and the most difficult thing, and the part of the exercise solution that has to have the most care put into it because it's not really natural, and it can lead to any outcome anyone wants. But there are, in some cases, a downside to those outcomes, which can be orthopedic problems. And so there's a lot of care that's put into that in the Stark ecosystem. I think you asked me a question. I don't even know if I answered it.
no, yeah. So I mean, obviously, exercise is the foundation and building strength, and then everything else that you guys layer on with nutrition, with mindset, with all the different protocols. They're all a part of what you guys do, kind of the ethos. And so, for anyone not who doesn't follow you, I mean, you are a specimen in and of your own right, and I mean, you have very lean, very low, body fat percentage. What have you kind of learned throughout the years, and how have you been able to attain such a good physique, for all the years that I've been following you? At least been five since probably
Okay.
2020. So,
Yeah, that's a good question. So what may be a little bit surprising is I don't really put a lot of care into my physique. It's mostly my internal health. And back to the Stark ecosystem, what is a standard practice is on a quarterly basis, myself as a student of Stark and all of the patients and students that are in our system, we're all tested very regularly. And so a lot of the things that I do are to optimize my health in total. It just so happens that when you're optimizing your micronutrients, for example, let's say
mhm.
omega 3s, there's a there's a global implication associated with that, from mental well-being to orthopedic health, hormones. It affects everything, hormone signaling specifically. And the things that we put into our body or don't put into our body create a cascade effect. And so when you have a team or an individual like you who's overseeing the micronutrients on board for an individual, knowing strategically what to change has a massive impact over a long period of time. So very slowly over a long period of time. And so imagine me having breakfast in the morning that I post on Instagram, what I'm actually eating, like the Pickle olive oil that's on, gluten-free toast if we're out of toast. So I didn't have any this morning. Uh, is in there because the doctor at Stark told me you need to consume this particular type of olive oil from a particular part of Spain. And I don't even remember exactly why. I just do it because it's still in my protocol. And so that in um, confluence with the rest of the things that I do from a nutrition standpoint and an exercise standpoint all lead to optimal states of being for not just body comp, which is the most visible part of my health. Like I walk around with I would say it's a full six pack, and I'm not even really trying. I just, I'm just eating really well and exercising optimally, and I'm moving a lot. But there's a lot of things that I do for my health that exhibit in part with things that you can see, like musculature, the amount of subcutaneous fat. You can sort of see the amount of visceral adipose tissue I have, like my belly doesn't stick out. You can see the quality of my skin, which isn't perfect, but for a 56-year-old is pretty good. And my hair, and those are the visible parts of it. What you can't see, which are also accounted for me and for anybody that's on the right path, or the opposite for people that are on the wrong path, which would be my joints don't really hurt, and I have a lot of energy. I love coffee. You see me drink that in the morning too, but I don't really need it. I just really love it, and I'm
You enjoy it,
clear-headed.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, my detox pathways are fantastic. My gut health is amazing. Again, you can't see these things. My hormones are optimized. That would be sex hormones, insulin, thyroid. Everything is money. My sex hormones are managed, but the others are from exceptional lifestyle interventions and such. I have problems like most of us have in some form or another. They're mostly around stress management and the lack of deep sleep specifically. We haven't figured out how to do that with me. Generally, I'm one of the most complex patients we have ever seen and probably will see. And it makes me a good sort of crash dummy for all the new theories that we want to try. And they're constantly being done because we have this team of 70 people that are always wondering, well, what can be done better? And I'm usually the one that's like the most willing to follow a difficult protocol for several months or for several weeks or whatever it takes to see if it's going to actually bear fruit. A really interesting example of that right now is with the emergence of amazing technology. There's it's not an ultrasound. It's not an MRI either. It's another form of imaging, but there's an AI overlay called Clearly. Have you heard of this?
I actually had a doctor tell me about this not too long ago. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's an amazing test. You do it with contrast, so there's some exposure that's unfortunate to radiation, but it's just a little bit, and there's other things that we do to kind of counterbalance that. But you have this imaging done of your heart, and it creates the Clearly overlay, which is like an AI function, creates a 3D image of your heart, and the cardiologist can rotate it around, slice it and dice it, and look at all different parts of your heart and see exactly where there's hard plaque, soft plaque, or nothing. The question then is, well, what do you do if you see problems? And cardiologists are generally sort of waiting in the background until you actually get closer to needing a problem, and then they do something like give you a stent or whatever. At Stark, we want to fix the problem with lifestyle, nutrition, exercise, and then go back and retest. And we also do carotid artery ultrasounds, which is a way less expensive, less invasive 15-minute procedure. And we've been experimenting with phosphatidylcholine IVs, and PTC it's a primary component of the cell membrane of all of our cells.
Hmm.
But it does some interesting things with regard to sort of emulsifying soft plaque in the arteries, or this is the theory anyway. And so I have some soft plaque buildup. We know exactly where it is and how much. and I've been doing like 5 months worth of phosphatidylcholine IVs that I post on Instagram. I don't think everybody picks it up, to be honest, that I'm doing this, but it is clearing out my arteries and my blood pressure, which has slowly been increasing over the last decade, with all of the things that I do and all the the low inflammation in my body and the amazing diet and me trying to sleep like 9 hours a night. That's me. Like I'm going to
Yeah.
the extreme level of trying to be really healthy, and I
You're doing it
still have
all.
this
Yeah.
problem. Well, my blood pressure has been for the last month roughly 120 to 125 over 70 to 78. This is perfect, right?
Yeah.
And the only thing that I've changed is doing those PTC IVs. I had the ultrasound done yesterday, a follow-up ultrasound, and it's the same tech. And I'm like, hey, you told me that on my left carotid artery that it was 70% blocked last time we saw each other. What does it look like today? He's like, there's nothing. I'm like,
Wow.
shit, really? And he's like, yeah, I wouldn't have known that if you didn't tell me, because he didn't have access to the previous records. Didn't even remember who I was, honestly. And on the right side, he's like, there's a little bit on the right side. I'm like, yeah, that wasn't the problem. It was the left side. Like, you really startled me. He either said 70% or like a 70-year-old, one of the two. And now he's like, oh, it looks great. So we're going to wait for a couple weeks to get the cardiologist report. But what we expect is that because of those PTC IVs, there's been some huge progress made. And then when I get the Clearly test done again, probably this summer, we should also expect to see a lot of soft plaque cleared from the rest of my heart as well, which is super exciting. So this is a success story buried under a pile of failures, because we're constantly trying things, but we have the ability to test on healthy people, which is a unique population, right?
Yeah.
With a lot of things that are managed, like diet and exercise, also very rare. And we have DEXA scans too. So we have this really unique, clear picture on what we believe to actually work, verified with testing within the Stark ecosystem. So it's turned into a fascinating and exciting business where we're learning so much more about the human body alongside the rapid exposure of new research, but in contrast sometimes with our clinical experience.
I mean, you guys are really, cutting edge in everything you guys do. And one thing that I was kind of fascinated with just talking with you previously is the your ability to manage time and what you do to be efficient and productive. And, you know, how do you accomplish so much in so little time? And how do you prioritize? I mean, you're obviously health and fitness is a huge piece of your life and lifestyle. But for anyone listening, that's kind of like where to start. Like, what are some easy steps that people do to manage their time, and what do you do, and what would you recommend?
Okay. Well, so because I'm the CEO of a company, I do a lot of things that are not related to health, like financial oversight, marketing oversight, operations. We have a lot of employees. So there's a lot of legal considerations, human resources considerations. There's a lot happening all the time. And I don't have a giant staff. So the things I guess the general concept. So this is strategy, not tactics, because the tactics may not apply to most people on listening to the podcast. And by that I mean, like, I have the ability to take my employees for a walk, and have them work around my schedule.
Yeah.
And we can have meetings, but we're moving. Okay, not everybody can do that. So you have to take these thoughts and concepts or strategies and try to find tactics that work within your own schedule. But the first one is you have to move. Like, we were not designed to be sedentary. And that doesn't mean we can't be sedentary sometimes, but not all the time. And the difference from my personal experience of being really, really unhealthy to being exceptionally healthy from a movement standpoint is going from walking a half an hour a day, which is very sedentary, to walking 2 hours a day, which is not sedentary at all. And that can include workouts too. And that equates to about 10,000 steps a day. That's not a lot of difference in time, but it leads to a massive change in outcome. The only way I can do that is by walking during my workday, part of the workday. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I'm sure you've talked about this with all of your patients and on your podcast as well. When you go to the supermarket, stay away from the middle of it. Just buy the stuff around the outside. So they're
Mhm.
all whole foods. I mean, if you just eat beef or chicken, you are going to starve to death. Protein is a really fascinating thing to me because you will literally starve to death if you just eat that. And that's one of the benefits of it. It's very energy inefficient, meaning it takes a lot of energy, a lot of caloric energy to assimilate it. And so when you eat protein, you're going to use a lot of calories just to break it down and use it in your body. And so it's, in my opinion, it's the most important food or macro for a modern lifestyle. If I'm a hunter gatherer, I've got to eat way more than just protein. I'll starve to death.
Right.
But as somebody that only moves for a couple hours a day, protein is a very, very important part of my diet to remain insulin sensitive and have ideal body composition and the cascade effect that those benefits kind of throw off.
What
So
kind of
that's a big
target do
one.
you look at? Yeah, what kind of target for a daily protein intake?
I eat 160 grams a day.
Is
Yeah.
that like based on body weights or?
It's based on my body weight. Uh-huh. And on my mobility, like how much I move. If I suddenly drop down to walking 5,000 steps a day and work out once a week, it's gonna go up, right? And the other macros are gonna come down. And I eat about 3,000 calories a day, which for my size, I'm about 165 pounds, is a lot of food. And so if
Yeah.
I become sedentary, that changes a lot. Protein goes up, um, my dietary fats and carbs come down.
Have you ever experimented with fasting?
I've done intermittent fasting. I've fasted for a few days. Um, I've done intermittent fasting where I've fasted in the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. Here's where our team, most of the time I'm coached by our team. And so
Hmm.
I have these ideas or read this thing or see the news or I'm on Instagram like everybody else. What do you think about this doc? Or what do you think about this nutritionist? And our stance in general is that almost no one eats enough protein. So do not fast. Like you're just making the problem worse. Just try to focus on what is fundamentally critical to your health and longevity as a modern human. Eat enough protein, high quality protein. Don't
Right.
starve yourself. Don't fast because you'll just never get enough of it.
Yeah, if you're fasting only eating once or twice a day, it's gonna be very hard to get that
Oh,
target,
it's
target.
impossible.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
impossible. Yeah, especially OMAD, people eating one meal a day. I
Hmm.
mean, how is someone can eat 200 grams of protein in one sitting?
It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about mindset. I know that's something you've been focusing on in some of your podcasts that you do. How do you calm down your nervous system and how do you focus your mind to be more productive and to be healthier?
Well, the first step for me is taking a step back for a second. I'm not as successful as I want to be in this category, so that's the first thing. But but the things that I do for most people work really, really well. They just don't work as well as I'd like to see them work for me. So the first one is my favorite app is Headspace. I've used that app for like 13 or 14 years since it was brand new, and it's come a long way. So now there's like if you look at the day's journey, there's a few different variations of meditation that you can do throughout the course of the day. I recommend you just sign up and you do exactly what they tell you to do. Just follow the system as close as you possibly can. And that should have a big impact. Well, you learn about your own thoughts. It's at some point when you meditate enough, and it's going to take 45 days or a month or a couple of weeks maybe to realize that you're anxious or you are some other thing that you never knew about, and you learn about yourself through that process. And then you also learn you can become whomever you want. And so it's this empowering experience of recognizing that your emotions are kind of, well, I think the analogy is that you are the blue sky and your emotions are clouds and they're just kind of passing through. And most people think that they are the emotion. Like I am depressed, I am anxious, I am charismatic, or I am, whatever it is that they're experiencing in the moment, they glom onto that. And usually they're the negative emotions, and they they believe that that's who they are, and it's just not really the case. And so once you recognize that they are all fleeting, and you're experiencing these, what I would describe as positive emotions and negative emotions, that they're just all moving through, and you're none of them. And that's a really helpful experience to have, and in terms of mental well-being. But the whole concept of mental health and mental well-being, which I would define as not just the absence of mental illness like anxiety and depression and other such issues, but the presence of a state of security, emotional security and safety, and recognizing that what's happening around you doesn't give you any of those things. Like you don't have really much control over anything, but that you become comfortable with that, and that you recognize that your experiences, your failures, your successes, they're what sort of make you up, and you don't become afraid then of having things like failures like I did when I lost everything. It was so devastating. Today, if I lost Stark, it wouldn't be, because I just see it as part of the exciting journey. Like, hey, what's going to happen next? You know,
Yeah.
in this whole story. And it's important to eventually get yourself there with these tools. And I've used a lot of different tools. The Pennebaker writing exercise, for example. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Like I said, breath work and meditation. Your listeners should check out the Pennebaker writing exercise. Everybody has traumatic experiences, and that kind of helps process them very, very effectively. And it's a whole episode, so I won't get into the details. I've done 30 plus ketamine assisted therapy sessions, which is a real experience in terms of learning more about who you actually are. Other psychedelics as well. I mean, I've done all the drugs except for the big party drugs like cocaine. The helpful drugs, the psychedelics, I think are really helpful in terms of understanding who you are, and they're not physically comfortable or pleasant generally. The ketamine, I think, touches on that, but the others are kind of miserable, like physically, at least for me. But I recommend looking into those tools to just kind of take a leap forward in terms of understanding who you are and what you're made of, and how your experiences have shaped who you think you are, and how that may not be actually the case. And when you start recognizing that, your mental well-being improves. And then there's also this concept of having purpose, which I think is so critical in mental well-being, and a big problem for young people. The concept of work-life balance is I think, a giant impediment to mental well-being. And that's not to say that they should all become workaholics and they'll find bliss at the other end. It's that humans need struggle and challenge, and without those things that maybe most 25-year-olds would label as bad, you can't also experience good. You can't experience what it's like to be successful if you haven't fought through the challenges that were holding you from that. And the greater the challenges, like my total disaster that I had financially in the earlier 2000s, or 2008, 2010, enable me to experience joy today that I didn't have the ability to before, because there's that contrast. We need that contrast. That's why it feels so good after you train really hard. It feels better after you train really hard, in contrast with not having a great workout, right? It feels better to have a great meal. Because it's so easy to slip. I mean, failure needs to be a part of your happiness. It's a part of the equation that's missing, and plays a big role in mental well-being. So I'm
Yes.
most
Yes.
excited about that, because I think that's probably the most complex and most difficult thing to achieve. The six pack is nothing in comparison. Mental
That's a result
well-being,
of yeah, that's the result of
yeah,
everything else that you've
yeah.
done and compounded day after day. One thing I wanted to ask you is, what do you do on a day that you don't feel like working out? There's a day, and we've all had these days. I had a day like this today and yesterday, and I still, kind of powered through. But what do you do for someone listening? Like, hey, they don't feel like working out, but you know what? I'm going to drive myself to the gym. What kind of things can they do to help them get through the workout or get through that diet or whatever it is? What are some strategies you might help them implement?
That's a good question. The working out part, if I really don't if I really don't have it in me, I'm just tired, or maybe I didn't sleep the night well the night before, or my stress levels are higher or whatever. It may not be a good idea to just go and train really hard. Like if an extreme example would be go do a CrossFit workout where everybody's like
Yeah.
pushing you along and you
Well, you might
and you just
modify it
bury
or
yourself.
some.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's helpful to get to move though on a daily basis. So if your thing is to therapeutically go to 24-hour fitness at the end of your workday and you just don't feel it, go anyway, but just get on the treadmill and walk and listen to some music that you really love. There's no downside to that whatsoever. You can maybe jog for a few minutes or whatever, but if you're considering the like a 7-day period and that's a day that can be spent there and you can push the training to the next day or whatever, then do that because it's not quite right. You'll tee yourself up for a great session the day after where you'll actually get some benefit. You'll hold yourself back by training too much and too hard. Like I only train on average something like 3.2 times a week, like actual strength training. And most people are like, oh, there's no way that's not possible. And the fact of the matter is that's a lot. Like consistently, including vacations and stuff. And if I'm sick or whatever, obviously I don't train. But it's just very, very consistent. It's methodical. It's not exciting, really. It's not exciting at all, but it's consistent. And that's really where health lies. It's just in the slow, gradual change of little tiny things that build up over time that are not exciting, but you just do them with high frequency. So exercise is definitely like if I'm going away, like I'm going away tomorrow morning, and I'm not gonna be able to train tomorrow, and I don't feel like it today. I'm gonna train today because I'm just gonna rest. It's a 5-hour flight. I'm just gonna be hardly moving all day long. If I'm going into a weekend, I'm not training today. I'm just going for a walk or a light jog, a medium intensity steady state cardio, something like that, and then I'll train tomorrow. I'll put it off.
Yeah. Well, you have a very regimented schedule that you've been very disciplined and worked hard to maintain that. But yeah, I love that. Don't push through. Listen to your body. Do something. Something is better than nothing. And
Right.
great tips for everyone to kind of adhere to. For anyone dealing with injuries, and I know you've kind of experimented or had several injuries and
Mhm.
setbacks, and what are some strategies and tips that you've used to kind of that you could, if you could go back in time, what would you have done differently to help you recover better, faster with the knowledge and tools that you've acquired throughout the years?
Okay. This is a great question. I mean, first, get some general understanding of why you have the injury. Um, One of my favorite examples is you're going to really appreciate this because of your background and your practice. When I think I was probably 21. I was in the gym at my university in Minnesota, and I was training, just doing muscle and fitness type stuff,
Hmm.
and the same thing over and over again, just like I
Yeah.
described as what you should not do. And and I was there was a one of those fixed barbells. It was a curl bar actually, that had like fixed plates on it, under like kind of jammed underneath the dumbbell rack. And so I wanted to use it, so I grabbed it and I lifted it up, and I was sort of bent over in an awkward way, and I felt my low back just kind of go out, and it was so painful I couldn't stand up. So I spun around and I held myself up with my hands on the dumbbell rack and waited for the paramedics to come because I couldn't go
Mm.
anywhere.
Wow.
So they hauled me away, took me to the hospital. I was like, shaking, and they put me on a bunch of drugs, and I laid in bed for a week, and the physical therapist told me to do certain exercises like push-ups with your pelvis like on the floor, not moving
McKinsey's,
off the
yeah.
floor. Yeah.
Yeah.
And and then told me that, there's a 90% likelihood that you'll have a similar injury within a year or whatever. And thankfully, well, I did. I had injuries like regularly, like bending over, picking up a sock, throwing my back out for the next 2 decades. And And so I just listened to what they said, and I'm like, oh, damn, that sucks to be me. I guess I'm just going to have to be that guy. But, in retrospect, it's so obvious that I had spent high school and college and grade school sitting on my ass, and my glutes were totally undeveloped and asleep. And I was just using my erectors my low back to lift that barbell, and it was just a matter of time that I was going to injure my low back. And it's why a lot of people injure their low backs, because they're not using the body the way it was designed to lift things that are heavy, because over time, our brain decides, you're not using those glutes. I'm going to just leave them off because it's just a waste of energy. And so what I really needed to be doing in the gym was developing my glutes so that my low back wasn't doing what it was not intended to do. And we've since course corrected that. Like I've got, for a middle-aged white man, some pretty big glutes, and they're super strong. I can deadlift 400 pounds. I
That's
don't have
impressive.
back
Very
pain any
impressive. Yeah.
longer. Yeah, and it's just from going through the process of developing the way my body should have been developed a long time ago. And so I'm forgetting the original question.
Yeah, just getting to
Yeah,
the root
just keep
cause
on
of,
going.
yeah,
Yeah.
go the root cause of just helping you
This
recover
is
faster. Yeah.
Yeah, this is it's a very common story, what I just described. Sometimes later in life, sometimes earlier. And the story is that just by not using our bodies the way they were intended, we decline, and it's all optional. And so what I would have done differently back then is understand how my body should be moving. Don't I think a lot of people still think like this about strength training. Don't like do curls because you want big biceps. Like if you get big biceps, is it going to screw up your elbows and your shoulders? Like understand what you're actually asking your body to do. Make sure that you're utilizing everything the right way. I mean, if I knew what a midline was back then and how to activate my midline before every single exercise, which is standard protocol at Stark, and know how to use my feet for every exercise, where my shoulders should be placed, where my chin should be, where my eyes should be focused,
Hmm.
I would never have had that back injury. It was just I was just lifting weights for aesthetics. And that's long gone for me. That's really far back into the past. I do not train for that any longer. There's an aesthetic component, but it's not at the sacrifice of orthopedic health. Orthopedic health is first managed, and then if it also helps with orthopedic health, sure. I mean, like glute development, especially for middle-aged white men with back problems, it's one of the most practical things to focus on from an orthopedic health standpoint. Everything up and down the biomechanical chain, as you know, is greatly affected by your glute development. And if they're working really well, you're likely not going to have back problems. And if they're working really, really well, you're likely not going to have problems with your feet either, and the strength of your big toe
You'll have a
and your
stable base
shoulder
for life.
placement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just don't think I think differently about strength training today. And I would have saved me 2 decades of misery, to be honest, or
Well,
periodic misery.
yeah, and you do a lot of body work and really do mobility and take that all very seriously, you
I
know.
do.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously your routine is gonna be different than some of the listeners here, but any strategies or tips or just general mobility
Yeah,
framework people can
this is
abide
something
by?
that you probably teach this, or you teach other variations of this, but I think one of the most practical things that everyone should be doing, whether you're 12 or you're 80, is circular articular rotations. You just Google it,
Cars.
get a bunch
Yeah.
of YouTube
Yeah.
videos, yeah, cars, and find out how to do it for your neck and your shoulders, and your elbows and your knees and your hips, and your thoracic spine. Like, just have a protocol that you do a couple times a day. It takes 5 minutes, and keep on pushing the limits of your range of motion. The purpose is to, improve your range of motion over time, and that's as a 12-year-old, maybe that's not on your things of list of things to do, but as a 40-year-old and older, when you start to see that your range of motion, your ability to move is starting to become impaired, you have to try to improve upon it. Don't just try to hold on to where you are as a 50-year-old. Like you have to be of the mindset that I can be better. And how do I do this? One very fundamental way is by doing regular cars.
So yeah, for anyone listening, cars are basically you're controlling a range of motion um, throughout its entirety. So yeah, great tip to do for every body part. It's kind of like a little check engine checklist you can do. So Todd, do you wake up stiff? Do you wake up stiff in the mornings? I mean, yeah, because you have a really good routine going. I mean, are there ever days you just wake up really stiff or sore? What does it look like?
Yeah, I would say I'm generally pretty stiff and sometimes sore. Not always sore. Yeah.
And what do you do for mitigating some of that?
Well, if I'm really sore, I make sure that I've got bigger gaps between my training sessions or I don't go as hard. Like the way I look at a training session is that if I come out the other end too sore, I'm not quite doing it the right way. I know that's the opposite of what everyone else is thinking. Like, wow, I'm so sore. I had such a great session. Well, I don't want to break my muscles down like that. I don't want to have to,
Yeah.
I don't want to create a recovery problem like that. The real value of doing strength training over a long period of time is maybe there's a little bit of soreness, but it's not devastating. And the magic is that you're doing it for long periods of time consistently. Yeah. So that's the first. What was the other question?
Just for just general tips, like if you obviously mitigating recovery and time between sessions, but is there like cold plunge, sauna, um,
Yeah.
rolling,
Yeah,
soft
I love
tissue
those
work?
tools. I love those tools. I do cars like I mentioned on a very regular basis, 1 or 2 times a day. I love the lacrosse ball. I have those
Mhm.
like if you walk through my home, you'll probably kick one with your toe. They're just all over the place.
Mine too, mine
Uh,
too.
yeah. Using a cold plunge, I do on almost a daily basis. Been doing that for the maybe 3 or 4 years now. That's a very helpful tool. If you don't have access to that, which is almost everyone, cold showers can elicit some benefit, not orthopedically necessarily, but they'll provide for the autonomic nervous system benefit that you may get from cold plunging, and just a general sense of mental well-being as you get a little dopamine spike from that. I love infrared saunas. We have one at one of the Stark locations, and I have one at home as well. And that's a really useful tool that they're popping up everywhere. That's a little bit easier to access, I think, than a cold plunge. And that's for detoxification and for older people like myself, if you're okay, if it's safe for you to use it, there's the concept of vascular plasticity. So you go in and you're constricted. Maybe it's wintertime like right now, and you hop into an infrared sauna or anything that's got a lot of heat, and your body forces your vascular system to dilate. So you become very, very vascular. And going from a tight vascular system to one that's expanded, that process can recreate some of the plasticity that you lose with age.
Mm.
So that's one of the reasons that I do it. And I just love it because you come out and you're like nice and relaxed and, ready to finish the day. And by the way, I do that at the end of the day, not at the beginning of the day, which some people do, but I think it's a bad idea. Just it makes me tired.
Gotcha, gotcha. So as we kind of get near the end of this interview, are you big on goals? Do you design goals, or if you don't do goals, do you do something similar? And what if you do have goals, what are your goals for the next 5, 10 years for yourself and for Stark?
That's a great question. Yes, I'm a huge fan of goals. I have a structure that's I don't know when this was created originally, but it's the Wheel of Life structure. And I sit down on an annual basis and I map out. Have you seen the Wheel of Life? You know that concept, the Wheel of Life?
I'm familiar with
Yeah.
it, yes.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, you just plot yourself on 8 different categories that are considered to be critical for anyone's life, like your relationship with your wife and spirituality and community and wealth building and career and all the things that make up your life. And if you have one area that's way lower than the rest of them, it creates like a divot. And so this wheel then it can't roll, right? So for example, a classic example here out in California, particularly in Newport Beach, is divorce. Like you have marital problems, you have everything else is wonderful, you have all the money in the world, and you're taking good care of your health and everything else, but you have a terrible relationship with your spouse and you're going through this divorce process. And I promise you everything else will collapse around it. And so
Hmm.
the idea of the wheel is to become mindful of like what's going on in your life in its entirety, because all of us tend to be attracted to one particular part of your life. Like career, for example, is one area that I don't have to prod myself in. I've just always been focused on that. And others, family or something else. And neglecting everything else in your life. And the idea is you can't really neglect it. And so you come up with these strategies that enable you to accomplish what you want to accomplish, and not let the other parts of your life fall by the wayside. And so you start to become really strategic in how you use your time. Like me taking care of my health, my kids all come to Stark. I see them when they're here, and sometimes I schedule having lunch with them after they work out, and so I'm with them. I'm spending quality time with them. They're taking care of their health. I'm taking care of my health, and I just knock down two or three of the eight spokes in my wheel. So that's the idea. You become strategic because you don't have 25 hours or 26 hours. You're still limited. The other thing that happens though is you become really thoughtful on how you use your time. And by that, I mean, when you start thinking through, well, how am I going to take this year-long set of goals or things I want to be differently than I am today in the future and actually make them happen? You have to boil it down to like what you're doing on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday next week and plot those things out. And what happens is that you start to realize you have so much time. You have so much control, actually, if you sit down and pause and think through what you really want. And you start blending in things like work-life balance. That's a freaking joke. Work-life integration is where the real solution is. Like, how do you do your job and spend time with your family and your kids and do all and the hobby that you love to do all at the same time is the question. It's not how do you separate these things. Like, you don't separate spirituality from your relationship with your wife, right? You have to,
Right.
they
Yeah.
all become one. And that's where accomplishment and excitement and fulfillment, I think, come from. It's the blending of all of those things. So I put a lot of care and time into thinking through how I'm going to spend my life this year, next year. And Stark, you asked about Stark too. Stark is part of me. It's an extension of me. Any job I've ever had is also, and so I don't really separate them because they're all interconnected in that wheel.
Yeah, it's that I love that work-life integration. I mean, me and my kids, we work out because I like to work out and I want to spend time with my kids. So it's like
It's
we're
perfect.
really, yeah, it's perfect. And you guys seem like you do the same thing. So I love that. And so one of the questions I like to ask everyone on here, and that I might already know your answer, it might actually be right behind you in your background, but
Oh,
it's the billboard question. So if you could put a slogan or a saying on a billboard on one of the busiest freeways in Los Angeles or wherever, what would you put on that billboard and why?
what would I put on a billboard? I think, I think, okay, maybe this isn't as pithy. No, it's pretty pithy. You did this to yourself.
Ooh,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, whether you're exactly where you want to be or beyond where you ever thought, or not anywhere where you want to be, or your life's a disaster, or it's a beautiful masterpiece, you did it. Like there's
yeah,
nothing that happened to you that you can point a finger at, and even if you think that it's great or it's terrible, it's your perspective, and you're responsible for that. Like my dad, my brother, who is really an amazing guy. He's an astronaut. I don't know if I told you that.
you did tell me
He
that. He took magnesium in space, you told me.
he took my. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Uh, my brother is wired to be super positive, and I am wired, at least I don't see myself like that now, but in the past was kind of the opposite. And my dad sat me down one day and he goes, so there's this, uh, let's see if I can get this right. There's a barn and it's full of, horse manure. Uh, the first kid walks in the door and he's like, oh, this is disgusting. Um, the second kid walks in the door and said, this is amazing. And the dad walks in and says, I want you guys to clean this out. And one is like, this is the last thing I ever want to do. And the other kid, which would be my brother, is I can't wait to get all this shit out because there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. And it's just perspective.
Yeah,
Same circumstances, same exact situation, but one person sees the world in a different way, and the experience of that is different as a result. And so, perspective is a big part of, I think, health, and there's nobody else steering that other than yourself.
Perspective is everything, and so is taking ownership. So yeah, two great insights. I thought you were going to say health is a skill, um, but yeah, thank you for that. The last question is, if you could take one, it could be it could be a compound, it could be a supplement, any tool with you on a deserted island, what would you take with you and why?
Compound would I take with me?
Maybe the Headspace
I,
app.
hmm. I don't think I'd need the Headspace app on a deserted island. I would I would probably I would probably bring testosterone cypionate.
Okay.
And the reason that is, this is because it's at this stage of my life. I'm older and I don't produce that like I should, because it's primarily a brain hormone, and the greatest impact it has on you is the impact on how you see the world. And if I'm on a deserted island, I don't want to be depressed. There's going to be a heavy element of that, and I need everything I can to try to fight back against that, and to look up at the sky and instead of think, I'm here all alone, this is terrible, I want to think, what a beautiful sky that is. And look at those wispy clouds passing by. And it's 80 degrees and there's a nice breeze. I want to think all of those things. And at my age, I would not do that if I have really low T.
Yeah. So you'd have better perspective, better motivation, better
Perspective, yeah.
drive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Todd, this has been a lot of fun. A lot of great insights were shared, a lot of great practical tips, and just I love just learning more about you and your philosophy and how you got started and how you've kind of evolved. And so, for anyone listening who doesn't follow you, where can they find you online? Where can they find the resources you share?
You can definitely go to Health is a Skill, and you can find that podcast wherever podcasts are. And you can find me on Instagram at testosterone. That's TESTODDERONE. And you can find my company at stark.health.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and the testosterone, the name is what you picked for the island. So that makes perfect
Testosterone,
sense.
yep. Yeah.
Testosterone. Yeah. Well, Todd, this has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. Thank you again for coming on, and we'll have to do it again soon.
Good to be here with you.
Thanks, Todd.
Thanks for listening to the Fredrickson Health Show. This podcast is for educational purposes only and not intended to be used as personalized medical advice. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss a single episode. While you're at it, leave us a rating and review. Follow us on social media and subscribe to our email newsletter for more information.